Welcome to the lecture and presentation on the structure of Canadian government. Canadian federalism. John A. Macdonald favored the British style of centralized government, in which there was a single, central government that oversees the governing of the whole country. However, the 4 provinces of British North America demanded some local governing powers, looking to the American federal style of governing. In a federal system, there are separate and distinct powers for the central or federal government and the provincial or state governments. A central government addresses national concerns, while provincial governments address local concerns. Macdonald believed the Civil War in the U.S. had broken out largely due to the states having too much power, while the central government did not have enough power to set effective policies. Macdonald's priority, as well as some of the other fathers of Confederation, was to make sure that any area of responsibility that was not clearly laid out in the Constitution would automatically be the responsibility of the federal government. A constitutional monarchy. The Fathers of Confederation made Canada a constitutional monarchy. The King or Queen of Britain is Canada's head of state. Final authority in making or changing laws lay in the hands of the King or Queen, not the Prime Ministers. However, the power of the King or Queen is limited. The power of the King or Queen is limited by the rules established by British tradition and the Canadian Constitution. In Canada, the King or Queen has a representative to act on his or her behalf, the Governor-General. All proposed bills passed by the Canadian government have to be approved by the Governor-General. The formal act of giving a bill final approval is called royal assent. The Governor-General also has the power to prorogue or adjourn for a specified time or to dissolve Parliament and call a general election. The parliamentary system. The Fathers of Confederation decided Canada would have a parliament to govern the country. Parliament consists of 3 distinct elements: the House of Commons, the Senate, and Cabinet. Each house has equal status as regards to its immunities, privileges, and powers, but each is far from being a duplicate of the other. One marked difference between the upper house or Senate and the lower house or the House of Commons is that the Speaker in the Senate is appointed by the Governor-General, while the House of Commons elects its own Speaker. The Senate was established to protect the regional interests of Canadians. Senators are summoned or appointed by the Governor-General on the recommendation of the Prime Minister. The Fathers of Confederation planned that senators would be knowledgeable and experienced, and would provide a careful review of any bills passed in the House of Commons. The Fathers of Confederation did not seem to trust those who were democratically elected by the people, so, before a bill reached the Governor-General, the Senate was to examine it and could send it back to the House of Commons for revision before it was sent on to the Governor-General for royal assent. The Fathers of Confederation also thought it was important that senators be able to act independently and in the best interest of all Canadians. Thus, Canadian senators were to be appointed for life, so that senators could not be swayed to make a decision one way or another because they were facing election. The members of the House of Commons are chosen by the people, based on representation by population. Thus, the country was divided into constituencies, groups of voters in a specific area. The number of residents in each constituency is roughly equal. At the time of Confederation, the male citizens in each constituency could vote to choose one representative to represent them in the House of Commons and vote on issues on their behalf. Elected representatives of the people make laws and decide how to spend government revenue, such as taxes. The Senate. At Confederation, provision was made for 72 senators. Senators must be at least 30 years of age, reside in the province for which they have been summoned, and have real personal property worth $4,000 in excess of any debts and liabilities. This property qualification for senators was encouraged by John A. Macdonald in order to ensure the protection of property rights of Canadians. Who is familiar with the Senate expense scandal of recent years? Pamela Wallin, a Saskatchewan senator, was one of the senators accused of excessive expense claims for living and travel they were not entitled to. She was also accused of having declared residence outside of the province for which she was summoned to represent. Wallin argued that Wadena, Saskatchewan was her home and where she owned property, but it was uncovered that she had a valid Ontario health card. In order to have this health card, she had to claim Ontario as her primary place of residence. This qualification for senator is taken very seriously today. The House of Commons. At the time of Confederation, representation was based on Quebec having the same number of seats that it had in the legislature of the province of Canada, with the other provinces being granted representation in proportion to that number. At the opening of the first Parliament, 181 members sat in the House of Commons representing the following provinces: 82 for Ontario, 65 for Quebec, 19 for Nova Scotia, and 15 for New Brunswick. With few exceptions, anyone who is qualified to vote can run for a seat in the House of Commons. The Constitution Act provides for the size and distribution of representation in the Commons, as well as for future readjustments or redistributions. Here is the current situation in terms of the seats in the House of Commons. With the redistribution and creation of Nunavut in 1999, the House now consists of 338 seats. Voting in Canada. Members are elected by popular vote at least once every 5 years to sit in the House of Commons. The country is divided into electoral districts, also known as ridings or constituencies, and each is entitled to 1 seat in the House of Commons. Canadian citizens 18 years of age or older are eligible to vote. First past the post is the voting system used here in Canada. Elections at the federal level are simultaneous and nationwide. Voting is by secret ballot, and a voter may cast only 1 vote for only 1 person on the ballot. To be elected, the candidate who gains the most votes wins, even if he or she has received fewer than half the votes. This voting system is known as first past the post, a single-member, simple plurality voting system. Electoral districts. Canada is divided into 3 electoral districts. The boundaries are determined by an Electoral Boundaries Commission following each decennial census. The boundaries are grouped by province and territory. Each of the 338 electoral districts or constituencies sends 1 member to the House of Commons, hence the 338 seats. An electoral district or constituency can be defined as any place or territorial area in Canada entitled to return a person to serve in the House of Commons. Following each decennial census, the number of seats to be apportioned among the provinces is decided. The electoral districts were last revised following the 2011 census, which led to an increase in the number of the House of Commons seats, from 308 to 338. The population serves as the main basis for assigning the seat total to each. Cast your vote. The most common way to vote is at the ordinary polls on election day. On election day, electors go to the polling station indicated on their voter information card. Electors who have not already registered can register at the polling station on election day after showing proof of identity and address. Voters can also cast their ballots at an advance poll, or they can vote by special ballot either at the local Elections Canada office or through the mail. When you arrive at the polling station, your name is crossed off the voters list and you go behind a voting screen to mark your ballot. When you go to vote, you have to take either 1 original piece of ID issued by a Canadian government or government agency that contains your photo, name, and address, such as your driver's license, or 2 original pieces of ID that have your name on them, and 1 must have your address as well, such as a health card and a SaskTel bill. Or you can take an oath and be vouched for by another elector who knows you, such as a neighbor or a roommate. This person would have to show authorized ID, and their name would have to be on the list of electors in the same polling division as you. Polling stations are open for 12 consecutive hours on election day. The election ballot lists the names of the candidates in alphabetical order, along with each one's political affiliation, unless they choose to have their either independent or no affiliation under their name. The voter then takes the ballot behind the voting screen and makes a clear mark in the circle beside the preferred name. Election results. A majority government exists when the governing party gains a majority of the seats in the House of Commons. Minority government exists when a governing party does not hold a majority of the seats in the House of Commons. A minority parliament in which no party can claim a majority of members of parliament may not necessarily result in a minority government if 2 or more parties are willing to form a coalition government. Currently, we have a majority government under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party of Canada. Cabinet. In Canada, the real power rests in neither the House of Commons nor the Senate. Canada has a Prime Minister who appoints a group of advisors called the Cabinet. Together, the Prime Minister and the Cabinet wield the real power in the government. The Prime Minister is the leader of the political party who gains the most seats in the House of Commons. The leader of a political party is chosen through a vote within the party prior to election. Once the Prime Minister is appointed, he or she selects a number of confidential advisors, usually from among the members of the government party, who are first made members of the Privy Council. This is a council composed of individuals chosen by the Governor-General to advise the Crown. In practice, Privy Council nominations are made on the advice of the Prime Minister. The selected confidential advisors are then sworn in as ministers. Collectively, they are known as the Ministry or Cabinet. A Prime Minister's choice of ministers is influenced by political considerations respecting, for example, geography, gender, and ethnicity. The Prime Minister alone decides on the size of the Cabinet and what constitutes an appropriate balance of representation. By custom, members of Cabinet have seats in Parliament and normally sit in the House of Commons. If a person from outside Parliament is appointed to Cabinet, they are expected to stand for election at the earliest possible opportunity. If they are unsuccessful at the polls, custom requires they resign from Cabinet. Here is a graphic map of the structure of Canadian government, with the Governor-General of Canada at the top, the Prime Minister and Cabinet Ministers below, Parliament under that, broken down to Senate and the House of Commons, in which the voters elect the representatives within the House of Commons. Division of federal and provincial powers. According to the British North America Act of 1867, the federal government would have 37 distinct powers as opposed to the 15 powers for the provinces. The federal government was also given the responsibility of peace, order, and good government of the new country. Only the central government would have a broad range of taxation powers. The central government was given the right to disallow any provincial law that it considered in contravention of a federal law. The provinces would have control over property and civil rights, natural resources, and matters of a merely local or private nature in the province. The provinces were given limited powers of taxation. These powers were given to the provinces to enable French Canadians to preserve and protect their unique cultural traditions, and to soothe the fears of those in the Atlantic region that Confederation would see their local traditions swallowed up. It was hoped that provincial governments would manage local matters that were essential for the preservation of regional identities. However, the lieutenant governors of each province, who were appointed by the federal government, had the power to veto any legislation that their province wished to pass. This caused many provinces to worry about the extent of their own power to control provincial affairs. Powers of governments. Federal government. National defense, foreign affairs, employment insurance, banking, federal taxes, postal service, copyright law, and criminal law are all responsibilities and powers of the federal government. The provincial governments are in charge of provincial taxes, hospitals, prisons, education, marriage, property and civil rights, rules of the road, and age of majority. These are just some examples of the powers of the federal and provincial governments of Canada under the Constitution Act of 1867. Problems with the British North America Act. There are two primary problems with the British North America Act of 1867. The Fathers of Confederation made no arrangement for how revisions to the Act could take place without British involvement. And if the federal and provincial governments disagreed on the interpretation of the Act, their only course of action was to turn to a British court, the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council. If any changes to the Constitution were to be made or any disputes resolved, they had to be approved by the British government and the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council. In fact, the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council was the final court of appeal for all Canadians until 1949, despite the fact that Canada had its own Supreme Court as of 1875.